Lieutenant Ryan Mitchell snatched the scope right off her rifle case in front of everyone, held it up like a trophy, and laughed. "Nobody issued you this, sweetheart. Must have been a mistake." The armory went quiet. Every eye in that room landed on Emily Carter. She didn't flinch. She didn't reach for it back. She just looked at him, steady, unhurried, and said, "Keep it." And that was the moment nobody in that room understood what they were actually standing next to. If this story moves you, subscribe to our channel and follow Emily's story all the way to the end. Drop a comment telling us what city you are watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The bus pulled into Naval Air Weapons Station, China Lake, on a Tuesday morning, and Emily Carter was the last one off. Not because she was slow, not because she was hesitant. She was the last one off because she had learned years ago that how you enter a room tells people who you are before you say a single word. So she waited. She let the SEALs and Rangers and Delta operators file out first, all of them, with their tactical bags and their custom cases and their attitudes that came preloaded like ammunition. She watched them move. She read them the way her father had taught her to read terrain, not with fear, not with admiration, but with the cold, precise attention of someone who understands that information is survival. Then she stepped off the bus. She was carrying two things: a standard-issue duffel bag over her left shoulder and a hard-shell rifle case in her right hand. The case was old, not worn in a rugged, stylish way. Old in the way that says this thing has been used and used hard and put back together more times than most people have fired a weapon. A Ranger named Toby Cruz saw the case first. He was standing near the intake building with two other men, a SEAL named Pacheco and a Delta operator. Everyone just called Bricks, and Cruz tilted his head the way a man does when he sees something he thinks is funny. "Is that a guitar case?" Cruz said, loud enough for the people around him to hear. A few men laughed, not all of them, but enough. Emily didn't look at Cruz. She kept walking toward the check-in table where a corporal with a clipboard was waiting with the efficient disinterest of someone who had processed too many of these invitationals to be impressed by any of it. "Carter Emily, Staff Sergeant, USMC," she said. The corporal scanned his list. He found her name, made a check, and handed her a packet without looking up. "Bunk assignments are inside. Range orientation is at 0800 tomorrow. Armory check-in closes at 1700 today." "Understood," Emily said. She picked up the packet and walked toward the residential building, and as she passed Cruz, she still didn't look at him. She didn't need to. She had already cataloged him. Cruz was the kind of man who needed an audience, which meant he was also the kind of man who fell apart when the audience stopped watching. She filed that away. Her bunk was at the end of a long hallway that smelled like industrial cleaner and old paint. The room had 4 bunks, but only one was assigned to her. The invitational had 12 competitors, total 11 men, and Emily and someone had already made it clear that she was being housed separately. Whether that was protocol or deliberate, she didn't know yet. She set the rifle case on the floor, placed the duffel on the mattress, and sat down beside it. She put her hands on her knees. She breathed. This was something she did every time she arrived somewhere new. Somewhere hostile, somewhere uncertain. She gave herself exactly 60 seconds to feel whatever she was feeling. Not to analyze it, not to push it down, not to weaponize it, just to feel it. Her father had taught her that too. "Emotions aren't the enemy," he used to say, cleaning his rifle at the kitchen table in their house in Billings. "Suppressing them is. You feel it, you name it, you let it pass. Then you work." Right now, what Emily felt was a familiar tightness in her chest. Not quite anger, not quite anxiety. Something between the two, a low compressed heat that she recognized as the specific sensation of being somewhere she wasn't supposed to be, according to people who had already decided. She named it. She let it pass. Then she stood up, opened the rifle case, and began her pre-competition inspection. The rifle inside was an M14, Vietnam era. The stock was worn smooth in the places where her father's hands had held it for years, and then in the places where her hands had held it for years after that. The barrel had been maintained obsessively, not just cleaned, but understood the way you understand something that has been part of your life since before you had words for what that meant. There were small marks on the stock, not decorative, but functional tiny notations her father had made in pencil, almost invisible, that she had long since memorized. She ran a clean patch through the barrel. She checked the action. She checked the trigger pull 4.5 pounds exactly as she had calibrated it before leaving Montana. She checked the iron sights, adjusting the rear aperture by a fraction of a millimeter, a habit more than a necessity. She closed the case. She was ready for armory check-in. The armory at China Lake was a large, utilitarian space that smelled like gun oil and authority. By the time Emily arrived, most of the other competitors had already been through. A young petty officer named Garza was managing the check-in station, logging each weapon into the competition system. He was efficient and professional, and he treated Emily the same way he had treated every other competitor, which she noted and appreciated. What she also noted was Lieutenant Ryan Mitchell. Mitchell was standing near the far end of the armory talking to two other SEALs, but he had clocked her the moment she walked in. She could feel it not because she was looking at him, but because the room shifted slightly, the way a room shifts when someone in it decides to pay attention in a particular way. Mitchell was everything his file suggested. She had done her research because she always did her research. West Coast SEAL 3 combat deployments, a reputation in the community as one of the best natural shooters his team had ever produced. His ego matched his record, which is to say it was considerable, and his record was the kind of thing that had given him permission in his own mind to have opinions about who belonged in rooms like this one. He walked over while she was laying out her equipment for inspection. He didn't introduce himself. He just looked at the M14 and then looked at her. "Is that real?" he said. "It's a firearm," Emily said. "So yes. I mean, is it competition ready?" He wasn't asking out of curiosity. He was performing skepticism for the small audience that had gathered in the casual, pretend accidental way that men gather when they sense a confrontation developing. "It'll be fine," Emily said, not looking up from her equipment log. "I'm sure it will," Mitchell said, and his tone was the tone of a man who is absolutely sure it won't be and wants everyone around him to understand that he is absolutely sure. "You know they're running targets out to 1,000 yards in the final phase. You planning on doing that with iron sights?" Emily looked up then. She met his eyes directly. She held the look for exactly long enough to make the silence uncomfortable. "I'll figure something out," she said. A couple of the men near Mitchell made sounds that weren't quite laughs, but were in the same family. Mitchell smiled, not a real smile, the kind that is actually a statement, and walked away. Emily returned to her equipment log. Garza, the petty officer, was pretending to study something on his clipboard. He was young enough that he hadn't yet learned how to hide the fact that he'd witnessed something uncomfortable. Emily caught his eye. "I need to pick up my issued scope," she said. "Garza, right." "Yes, Staff Sergeant," Garza said. He went to the equipment wall and came back with a scope in a padded case. Emily opened the case. She looked at the scope for a moment. It was a Leupold Mark IV. Good glass. Or it had been. The turret housing was cracked on the left side, a hairline fracture that would make zero retention unreliable under recoil. The elevation knob had a slight wobble that indicated internal damage. She rotated the magnification ring. It moved, but not cleanly. This scope would fail. Not immediately, maybe, but it would fail. She turned it over in her hands. She looked at the serial number. She looked at Garza. "When was this last serviced?" she said. Garza checked his log. Something moved in his expression, not guilt, but discomfort. 3 weeks ago, he said. "Who signed off on the inspection?" A pause. "Lieutenant Mitchell," Garza said quietly. The armory was not completely silent, but it felt like it was. Emily set the scope on the counter between them. She looked at it for a moment, the way you look at something you have already made a decision about. "I won't be needing this," she said. Garza blinked. "Staff Sergeant, competition rules require that I carry issued equipment to the line," Emily said. "They don't specify that I have to use it once I'm there." She had read the rule packet 3 times on the bus. She knew exactly what it said and what it didn't say. "Log me as issued and declined. I'll run iron sights." Garza looked at her. He looked at the scope. He looked back at her. "That's your call," he said carefully. "It is," Emily said. She picked up her case and walked toward the exit. She was almost at the door when Mitchell's voice came from somewhere behind her, casual and carrying, designed to reach her without being directed at her. "Iron sights at 1,000 yards, he said. "That's ambitious." Emily paused at the door. She didn't turn around. "Ambitious," she repeated like she was tasting the word and finding it slightly off. Then she pushed the door open and walked out. Behind her, someone said something low and amused. She didn't need to hear it. She had already moved on. That night after chow, Emily sat on her bunk with her father's rifle across her knees. and did what she had done since she was 9 years old. She held it, not cleaned it, not inspected it, just held it. There is a weight to a rifle that is specific to every individual weapon, the way a person's handshake is specific to them. This rifle's weight was something she had internalized so deeply that holding it felt less like holding an object and more like a form of memory. Her father, Staff Sergeant William Carter, USMC, had carried this rifle through 2 tours. He had come home from the second one quieter than when he left, and he had spent the years that followed in the mountains north of Billings, hunting and teaching. What he taught most was patience. What he taught second most was how to read wind. What he taught third, and this was the one that took Emily the longest to understand, was that the rifle doesn't shoot. The person shoots. The rifle is just the last inch of a long chain of decisions. She had asked him once why he kept the M14 instead of upgrading. He had looked at her the way he sometimes did, like she had asked him a question that had a much deeper answer than the question knew. "Because I trust it," he said. "I know every way it can surprise me, and it knows every way I can surprise it. That's not something you find in a new piece of equipment. That's something you build." She was 27 years old now, and she had been building it for 18 years. She set the rifle in the case, lay back on the bunk, and stared at the ceiling. She thought about Mitchell's face when she had declined the scope. There had been a fraction of a second she had caught it where his amusement had flickered. Just for a second. Not into respect, not yet, but into something that recognized it was standing next to something unexpected. That fraction of a second was enough. She closed her eyes. Tomorrow the shooting started. The first day of qualification rounds began before dawn. Not officially, the formal start was at 0800, but Emily was on the range at 0630, alone dry firing. This was part of her process. Dry firing in a new environment let her feel the space without the noise, let her body calibrate to the distances, let her mind settle into the rhythm that she needed before she could perform at the level she was capable of. At 0745, the other competitors began arriving. She heard Mitchell before she saw him. He was talking to a ranger named Holloway about a night vision setup he'd sourced for the final phase, something custom and reportedly extraordinary. His voice was the voice of a man who is used to being heard, not loud exactly, but carrying with the unconscious assumption that whatever he was saying was worth listening to. He saw her standing at the 500-yard line and said, without interrupting himself, "Sergeant Iron Sights is already here. Probably been practicing since 0400. A few men laughed. Holloway had the decency to look uncomfortable. Emily did not look at Mitchell. Master Sergeant James Hendricks arrived at 0758. He was a lean man in his mid-40s with a stillness about him that came from a very long time of being someone who didn't waste motion. He had competed in 2 previous invitationals, finished top 3 in both, and was widely considered the elder statesman of the current field. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. He set up at the station next to Emily and went through his pre-shoot checks with the methodical precision of someone who has done this so many times that it has become meditative. After about 3 minutes without looking up from his equipment, he said, "You declined the issued scope." "It was damaged," Emily said. Hendricks was quiet for a moment. "Most people would have complained about it, filed something." "Most people would have lost time doing that," Emily said. Hendricks looked at her then. Just a look, brief, assessing the way a craftsman looks at a piece of work to determine what kind of craftsman made it. "Whose rifle is that?" he said. "My father's," Emily said. Hendricks nodded slowly, the way people nod when something has confirmed something they already suspected. He didn't say anything else. He went back to his checks. The first qualification round was 200 yards, standing prone in supported positions. Standard. The kind of shooting that every person on this range could do in their sleep, and everyone knew it. The real assessment wouldn't begin until the distances stretched out. Emily shot the 200-yard stage with clean, efficient mechanics. Her groups were tight, not flashy tight, not show-off tight, but the kind of tight that comes from someone who understands that precision at short range is just proof of fundamentals, not proof of anything exceptional. She finished and stepped back from the line. Cruz was 2 stations down, and he looked at her target and then looked away like he hadn't, which meant he had. The 400-yard stage was where the field began to differentiate itself. Wind had come up from the southwest variable, gusting between 8 and 12 miles per hour. The men with ballistic calculators punched numbers. The men with mil-dot scopes tracked and compensated. Mitchell, she could see him from her peripheral vision, dialed his corrections with the practiced speed of someone who had absolute confidence in his systems. Emily stood at the line and felt the wind. Her father had spent 3 months teaching her to read wind with her face before she was allowed to compensate for it in her shots. Not with a mirage indicator, not with a ballistic app, with her face. The way the air moved against her cheeks, the way it pressed or pulled at different altitudes. She learned to feel the difference between an 8-mile-per-hour gust and a 10-mile-per-hour one without looking at any instrument. Standing at the 400-yard line now, she felt the wind against the left side of her face and slightly upward from below, which told her the primary crosswind was being deflected by the berm to her left, and the effective push on a projectile at this distance was going to be slightly less than the raw reading suggested. She made the adjustment in her head. She went prone, settled into the rifle, breathed, and fired. Center hit. She fired the next 4 rounds. 4 more center hits. She stood up and stepped back from the line. No one said anything. The silence itself was a kind of statement. When you are performing well and no one says anything, it means the people watching are recalibrating. Not celebrating you, recalibrating the model they had built of what you were capable of. That recalibration was audible in the quiet. Mitchell finished his 400-yard stage a moment later and looked at her target. Just a glance, the kind of glance that is designed to look casual but is actually deliberate. She saw him look. He walked past her without speaking. The 600-yard stage was the last of the first day. By this point, the field had sorted itself. 4 competitors were clearly at the top of the pack: Hendricks Mitchell, a Delta operator named Okafor, and Emily. The remaining 8 were competitive, but there was now a visible gap. The 600-yard target was a 10-inch steel circle. With a scope in calm conditions, a shooter of this caliber could expect to hit it consistently. With iron sights and variable wind at the end of a full day of shooting, it was a different calculation. Emily stepped to the line. She could feel the attention of the range on her. Not loud, the range was professionally quiet, but present. The way attention is a physical thing when enough of it is directed at the same point. She settled into the rifle. She breathed once, twice. She found the target through the rear aperture, a small dark circle in a larger field of gray afternoon light, and she found the iron front sight, and she aligned them the way she had aligned them thousands of times in her father's backyard, in the mountains, in training in the darkness at midnight when she couldn't sleep and needed the ritual of it to feel grounded. She exhaled half a breath and held. She pressed the trigger. The rifle came back. She let it settle. Center hit. She heard it before she saw it, confirmed the clean, specific ring of a projectile hitting the center of a steel target is a different sound than a hit on the edge, and she had been listening to that sound her whole life. She fired the remaining 4 rounds. 3 center hits. 1 hit at the 9 o'clock edge, which in the context of iron sights, at 600 yards in variable wind, was not a miss. It was evidence of something even more interesting than perfection. It was evidence of a human being compensating in real time under real conditions. She cleared her rifle and stepped back. Behind her, she heard Hendricks say very quietly, almost to himself, "Lord Almighty." She didn't turn around, but something in her chest loosened just slightly. The compression she had been carrying since she stepped off the bus. Not gone, but loosened. She picked up her rifle case and began walking back toward the residential building. Behind her, she could feel the range talking not to her, but about her, and she knew the difference. The talking about her now was not the same as the talking about her that morning. The register had changed. She passed Mitchell on the way out. He was standing with Holloway in a seal she didn't know, and as she passed, he said nothing. He just watched her. She could see it in her peripheral vision, that steady, unblinking regard that meant someone was revising a conclusion they had already committed to publicly. She walked past. She didn't give him anything. Not a look, not a nod, not a word. She had work to do tomorrow, and the day after, and whatever came after that. And somewhere in a way she couldn't quite explain, but could feel clearly, she knew her father was with her on this range. Not in any mystical sense, but in the way that everything you were taught by someone who loved you becomes inseparable from who you are. She walked back to her room. She set the rifle down. She breathed. She was just getting started. The next morning, Emily was back on the range before anyone else. Not because she needed to prove something, because she needed to know something specifically, whether what had happened yesterday was repeatable or whether it had been the particular alignment of conditions that sometimes makes a good shooter look like a great one. She dry fired for 20 minutes at the 600-yard steel. In her mind, eyes open, rifle up, working the trigger, without ammunition, building the groove that competition would demand. Her father called this painting the shot before you fire it. You shoot it in your mind first. You feel the recoil before it comes. You hear the ring before the bullet travels. Then when the real moment arrives, your body is already familiar with success. By the time the other competitors began arriving, she had painted it 40 times. Cruz showed up first among the group, and he did something she hadn't expected. He nodded at her, not a warm nod, not a friendly nod, the kind of nod that a man gives when he has been arguing with himself overnight about something and has arrived at a reluctant conclusion. She returned it, same temperature, same brevity. That small exchange told her more than the previous day's silence had. Hendricks arrived at 0740 and went directly to the station beside her without ceremony the way he had the day before. She was beginning to understand his way of making a statement without making one. In a world where everything was watched and measured, positioning was language. "Sleep well?" he asked. "Well enough," she said. "First day results are posted," he said. He said it without looking at her, adjusting his rear sight. "You're second." She had known she would be somewhere near the top. She hadn't known the exact number. "Behind Mitchell?" she asked. "Behind me," Hendricks said, and there was something in his voice that was almost humor. "Mitchell's third." She absorbed that. Third was not where Mitchell expected to be. Not after day one, not with his setup, his equipment, his history in competitions like this one. "How'd he take it?" she said. Hendricks made a small sound, not quite a laugh, but related. "He was on the phone for 40 minutes last night. I could hear him through the wall." She didn't ask what Mitchell had said on the phone. She could guess the shape of it. A man like Mitchell coming in third behind a woman with iron sights on day one needed to explain that to someone. The explaining would be its own kind of trap, because every explanation he gave would require him to make her sound either capable or lucky, and neither of those was comfortable for him. The second day's program opened with 700-yard static targets, then shifted to a moving target drill that the range officers had designed specifically to stress the field targets crossing at varying speeds between 500 and 800 yards, appearing for windows of 2 to 4 seconds before dropping. The moving target drill was where equipment usually showed its value. Mil-dot reticles, high magnification glass range-finding systems, all of it was built for exactly this kind of problem. It was the kind of stage where iron sights were supposed to fall apart. Emily knew this. She had known it since she read the competition format on the bus, and she had a plan. Her father had made her shoot moving targets with iron sights starting at age 12. Not difficult ones at first, Clay, birds thrown underhand at 50 yards, then graduating outward in distance and speed over years. The principle he drilled into her was not about leading the target, not in the conventional sense. It was about rhythm. A moving target has a pattern, he told her. Even if the pattern is random, your body can find it faster than your brain can calculate it. Trust your body. Your brain will slow you down. She had spent years learning to trust her body. At the 500-yard moving target station, she tracked the first crossing target, a silhouette moving left to right at a moderate pace, and she felt her body find the rhythm of it within the first 2 seconds. She pressed the trigger at the point that her body told her to press it, not the point her brain confirmed. Hit. Center mass. The second target moved right to left faster. She tracked it, found the rhythm, pressed. Hit. High center. By the fourth target, she was no longer thinking about the targets at all in any conscious sense. She was in the state her father called the quiet, the specific mental condition where conscious processing steps back and trained instinct takes over, where the gap between seeing and responding collapses to almost nothing. She finished the 500-yard moving stage without a miss. When she stepped back from the line, the range was doing that thing again, that specific quality of silence that was not empty, but full of something people hadn't decided how to say yet. Mitchell was 3 stations down. She could see him in her peripheral vision, could see the slight forward tilt of his body. That meant he was aware of her performance in a way that was affecting his own concentration. She filed that away too. The 700-yard moving targets were the stage where she expected to lose ground. At that distance, with iron sights, the target subtended less than a degree of arc. The movement would be almost imperceptible at the aperture. The timing would have to be almost entirely instinctive. She stepped to the line. She picked up the first target as it began its crossing run. At 700 yards, the silhouette was small through iron sights. It was very small, but she found it, and she found something like the rhythm of it, and she pressed. The steel rang. Hit. She heard someone behind her say no, not angry, just disbelieving, and she pressed the sound away and tracked the next target. Hit again. By the fifth target at 700 yards, she had 4 hits and 1 near miss that had caught the right edge of the silhouette. In the context of this stage with this equipment, it was a performance that should not have been possible. She knew that. The range knew that. She cleared her weapon and stepped back. Okafor, the Delta operator, who had been quietly one of the top performers since day one, was 2 stations over, and he turned to look at her with the specific expression of a man who has just witnessed something that has expanded his understanding of what is possible. He gave her a single nod. Not the reluctant nod Cruz had given her that morning. Something more direct. Professional acknowledgement peer-to-peer. She nodded back. That was when she noticed it. Not immediately, the competition day was full and structured and left little time for anything outside the shooting. But during a break between stages, when she returned to her bag to reload, she reached for her secondary ammunition pouch and found it 40 rounds short. She counted twice. She was not the kind of person who miscounted. She had loaded 300 rounds the night before for day 2. She had fired 112 in the morning stages. She should have had 188 rounds remaining in her secondary pouch. She had 146. 42 rounds were gone. She looked at the pouch. It had a zipper closure that she always left partially open for access speed. Someone with a casual hand in 2 seconds could have reached in and taken ammunition without her noticing in the movement and noise of a competition day. She did not react visibly. She did not look around the range to see who might be watching her discover this. She had learned from years of training in environments where being watched was a tactical reality that your first response to being targeted tells your target everything about how threatened you feel. She felt threatened. She was not going to tell anyone that. She recalculated her ammunition plan for the afternoon stages. She could manage. She would have to be more conservative in the stress fire portions, but she could manage. She zipped the pouch and returned to the line. During the lunch break, Hendricks appeared beside her at the water station with 2 cups of coffee. He handed her one without asking if she wanted it. "Someone got into your gear," he said. Not a question. She looked at him. "What makes you say that?" "Because I saw Pacheco near your bag during the stage break," he said. "And I've been doing this long enough to know what someone looks like when they're not just passing through." She held the coffee with both hands. "Pacheco is Mitchell's teammate." "He is," Hendricks said. She thought about that. She thought about the broken scope that Mitchell had signed off on. She thought about the missing ammunition. She thought about the fact that she was performing well enough to make this necessary. "I'll note it," she said. "You should report it," Hendricks said. "To who?" she said. "Right now, I have a suspicion and a count." "That's not a report, that's a complaint." She looked at him. "I'm not making complaints. Not here." Hendricks looked at her for a long moment. Something moved through his expression, not quite admiration, because admiration has warmth in it, and what she saw in him was more like recognition. "Your father was Army?" he asked. "Marines," she said. "Vietnam." Hendricks nodded slowly. "You shoot like someone who was taught by someone who had to make every round count," he said. She thought about that, about her father at the kitchen table teaching her to reload by feel in the dark, about him saying, "Ammunition is not infinite. Treat every round like it cost you something, because one day it will." "He did," she said. Hendricks raised his coffee cup slightly, a small private gesture. She touched hers to it. They drank. The afternoon stages began at 1300 hours, and Emily knew within the first 10 minutes that something had shifted in the dynamic of the range. It wasn't subtle, or rather, it was subtle in the way that major weather systems are subtle when they're still 50 miles away, the kind of subtle that trained observers notice, and everyone else will figure out in hindsight. Mitchell was shooting differently. Not worse, his marksmanship was objectively still excellent, but there was a tightness in his setup that hadn't been there in the morning, a slight hurry in his transitions. The quality of composure that elite shooters project, that sense of operating just below the ceiling of their capability with room to spare, had compressed. He was closer to his ceiling than he'd been the day before. She noticed it and noted it and did not allow it to change anything about her own approach. The afternoon's centerpiece was a stress fire stage, a combat simulation format where competitors moved between three firing positions while fatigued from a 200-meter sprint. Heart rates elevated, hands not quite steady, and then the shooting started. Targets at 200, 400, and 600 yards. Time limited. Points deducted for every second over par. Emily ran the sprint. She was not the fastest runner on the range. She was built for endurance, not speed, but she paced herself with the specific intelligence of someone who knows that arriving at the firing position half a second later, but with a more settled heart rate, is a better trade than arriving first and shooting with a pulse in the 150s. She dropped into prone at the first position. Her heart was elevated. Her hands had the faint tremor of physical exertion. She felt it, she didn't fight it. She breathed with it, let it rise and begin to fall, and in the falling she found the moment. 200-yard target. She pressed, hit. She transitioned to the second position. Running, her lungs working hard now, the kind of honest effort that strips away everything except what you actually know how to do. 400-yard target. She settled, breathed, pressed, hit. The 600-yard position was where the stage was supposed to separate the competitors. At 600 yards under physical stress, with iron sights, every variable that had ever undermined any shooter was present at once. She dropped into prone. Her heart was in her throat. Her hands were shaking with a fine exhaustion-driven tremor that she could feel against the rifle stock. She found the target through the aperture. Small, distant, wavering slightly in the movement of heat and the movement of her own blood. Her father's voice in her head. Not words, just presence. The particular quality of patient attention he had always brought to the moments when she was about to do something difficult. She pressed the trigger. The rifle fired. She heard it before she could confirm it. The ring of a center hit at 600 yards. A sound she had heard thousands of times, but which in that moment, with the full weight of the day behind it, landed somewhere below her sternum, like a bell struck by something true. Center hit. She stood up. Her legs were shaking slightly. Not from fear, from effort. She let them shake and walked back to the staging area. Okafor was there removing his hearing protection, and when she walked past him, he said quietly but clearly, "That's the best stress fire I've ever seen on this range." She looked at him. "You've done this before, Boone." "Third time," he said. "I've never seen a 600 iron sight stress hit." He paused. "Not without a scope, not running, not at those times." She felt something in her chest that she wasn't expecting. Not pride exactly, but its quieter cousin. The feeling of having done something real, something that existed independent of anyone's opinion of it. "Thank you," she said. And that's when she saw Mitchell. He was standing 20 feet away, and he had heard Okafor. She could tell by the set of his jaw, the specific tightening that comes when a man hears praise directed at someone he has decided doesn't deserve it and cannot find a credible objection. He looked at her. She looked at him. Something passed between them in that look. Not understanding, not yet, but the beginning of a reckoning. She could see it in him, the first hairline fracture, in the certainty he had carried onto this range from the moment she stepped off that bus. He turned and walked away. She watched him go. That evening, after the range scores were posted, she had moved to first overall Hendricks, second, Mitchell third. She found something wrong with her training schedule. She had it memorized. Every event, every time block, every stage sequence for the remaining days of the competition. She had studied it the way she studied everything until it was internal, until she didn't need the paper. The paper was gone from her binder, not her notes on it. The official schedule, the physical copy that was supposed to remain in her competition packet for reference and signature requirements. She went to the range office and requested a replacement copy from the duty sergeant, a compact and professionally neutral man named Wallace, who printed her a new one without questions, but with the kind of quiet efficiency that suggested he had been briefed to expect requests like this one and was handling it accordingly. She took the new schedule, returned to her room, and sat on the bunk. 3 incidents now: the broken scope signed off by Mitchell, the missing ammunition, the stolen schedule. She laid them out in her mind the way she laid out a shot, not emotionally but architecturally. What did they have in common? They were all targeted at her performance, not her safety. They were all deniable. The scope could be claimed as an oversight, the ammunition as her own miscounting, the schedule as misplacement. They were all small enough individually that reporting any one of them would make her look like she was making excuses. Whoever was doing this understood exactly what kind of complaint she'd be dismissed as. That was the most telling detail of all. This wasn't impulsive. This was calculated. She folded the new schedule and placed it in a different location inside the lining of her rifle case, where it would be harder to access without her noticing. She lay back on the bunk. She thought about her father, about a story he'd told her when she was 15, about a night in Vietnam when his unit had been given deliberately wrong coordinates, not by the enemy, but by someone in their own chain who didn't want the mission to succeed. He'd found out an hour before the operation. He hadn't reported it. He'd corrected the coordinates himself, gone in, and come out with every man accounted for. She'd asked him why he hadn't reported it. Because reporting it would have taken the night, he said, and the night was what mattered. She understood that now in a way she hadn't at 15. The night ahead of her was what mattered. Not the sabotage, not the missing rounds, not the scope. What mattered was showing up tomorrow and doing what she had been built to do. She closed her eyes. Outside somewhere in the residential block, she could hear voices, male voices low and intense, and she recognized one of them as Mitchell's, though she couldn't make out words. She heard the tension in the cadence of it, the specific rhythm of a man who is recalibrating not just his strategy, but his understanding of the situation he is in. She had seen that recalibration before. On a training exercise in the Mojave when she had outshot a staff sergeant who outranked her by 2 grades and had expected to be unreachable. On the civilian circuit at a precision rifle match in Wyoming, when a sponsored shooter with $10,000 of glass had watched her put 5 rounds through a 3-inch group at 800 yards with her father's rifle and iron sights, and had looked at her afterward like she was something out of a context he hadn't prepared for. The recalibration was always the same. It started with disbelief, moved through something like anger, and arrived in the better men anyway at a kind of uneasy respect that they didn't entirely know what to do with yet. Mitchell was somewhere in that process. She didn't know where. She didn't particularly need to know. What she needed was sleep. She was in first place in an elite military sniper competition, shooting with a Vietnam-era rifle and iron sights against the best shooters the American military had produced in the last decade. And the hard part hadn't started yet. She let herself feel that for exactly 60 seconds, the compression of it, the pressure, the faint electric awareness of being exactly where she was supposed to be, even though nothing about it was comfortable. Then she let it pass. She breathed. She slept. She woke at 04:30 without an alarm. This was normal for her. Her body had been calibrated by years of early training to surface from sleep at the moment she needed to surface without assistance, without the jolt of an external sound pulling her out of whatever her mind had been doing in the dark. She lay still for 30 seconds, running through the day ahead, the way a pilot runs through a pre-flight checklist, not anxiously, not with dread, but with the professional attention of someone who understands that preparation is not worry. Preparation is control. Day 3 of the Invitational. The program called for 800-yard static targets in the morning, followed by a 1,000-yard qualification attempt in the afternoon. The 1,000-yard stage was the one that had been in the back of every conversation since she arrived, the stage that everyone understood was the real test, the one that separated competitors who were excellent from competitors who were operating at a different level entirely. With a scope, with a ballistic calculator, with modern glass, 1,000 yards was a known problem with known solutions. With iron sights, it was something else. It was the kind of shot that required everything to be right simultaneously: the wind colta, the hold, the breath, the trigger, press, the follow-through, and offered no margin for any of it to be slightly wrong. She had made this shot before, twice in her life under her father's supervision in the mountains north of Billings, in conditions that were less structured than a competition range, but no less demanding. She had made it both times. But making a shot twice in a controlled context with your father watching is different from making it on day 3 of a military invitational in first place with 11 men waiting to see if you fail. She knew that. She factored it in. Then she set it aside and got up. By 05:15, she was in the range's small pre-shoot preparation area, a room adjacent to the main armory where competitors could sit with their rifles and work through whatever mental preparation they needed. She expected it to be empty. It wasn't. Hendricks was there sitting in a chair with his rifle across his knees and a cup of coffee going cold on the floor beside him. He looked like he had been there for a while. Couldn't sleep, Emily said. Slept fine, Hendricks said. Got up early to think. She sat down across from him and began the process of holding her father's rifle, the pre-shoot ritual she'd developed over years, the quiet familiarization that settled her system. For a minute, neither of them spoke. Then Hendricks said, I put in a word with Commander Reeves last night. She looked up. About what? About the scope. About your ammunition count. He held her gaze. I told him what I told you, that I saw Pacheco near your gear. He's looking into it. She felt a complex thing move through her, gratitude and irritation in almost equal measure, which she recognized as the specific emotional signature of someone who needed help and didn't entirely want it. I was going to handle it myself, she said. I know, Hendricks said, but you were going to handle it after the competition, and that's too late if it escalates. She thought about the three incidents, the broken scope, the missing ammunition, the stolen schedule. She thought about the pattern she'd identified, small, deniable, calculated. Has it escalated? She said. Hendricks looked at her steadily. Last night, Garza came to me, the young petty officer from the armory. He paused. He said someone accessed the locked equipment storage after hours, used a code that shouldn't have been available to competitors. The room went quiet in a particular way. What was accessed? She said. Your rifle case storage bay, Hendricks said. Nothing was taken. Garza caught it on the log before anything happened, but someone tried. Emily held the rifle a little differently. Not tighter, she was too disciplined for that, but differently. The way you hold something when you've just been reminded that someone else wants access to it. Garza reported it, she said. To me first, Hendricks said. He was nervous. He's a good kid who doesn't want to be in the middle of something. Tell him he did the right thing, she said, and tell Reeves. Already done, Hendricks said. She nodded. She looked at her rifle. She looked back at Hendricks. Who do you think it is? She said. Not who she thought it was. Who he thought. Hendricks picked up his cold coffee, considered it, set it back down. I think you already know, he said, and I think you have known since the armory on day one. She had known since the armory on day one. She just hadn't wanted to say it out loud because saying it out loud would make it the story, and she refused to let the sabotage become the story. The shooting was the story. Everything else was noise. It doesn't change today, she said. No. Hendricks agreed. It doesn't change today. They sat in silence for another few minutes, and in that silence, Emily felt something she hadn't felt since arriving at China Lake, not quite comfort, but the specific steadiness that comes from not being entirely alone. She had been operating as an island since she stepped off the bus by necessity and by habit, and the recognition that Hendricks had positioned himself beside her, not in front of her, not as a protector, but beside her. As a peer was something she felt in a way that was more than professional. She thought about her father. She thought about how often he'd told her that the most dangerous assumption any soldier could make was that they were operating alone. Even a sniper needs a spotter, he used to say, and the best spotter isn't the one who carries your gear. It's the one who sees what you can't. Hendricks, she thought, was a spotter. She filed that away. At 0800, the range came alive with the compressed, purposeful energy of day 3, the day when the competition structure became serious, when the comfortable distance between competitors and their real capabilities collapsed, when everyone on the line understood that what happened today would define the outcome. The 800-yard stage opened in clear conditions, minimal wind, good light, the kind of morning that makes a shooter feel like the environment is cooperating. Emily knew that feeling was a trap. Good conditions in the morning often preceded difficult conditions in the afternoon, and the body could be lulled into a rhythm by easy morning shooting that made the afternoon's adjustments harder. She shot the 800-yard stage with deliberate conservatism. Clean hits, reliable groups, nothing spectacular. She was not trying to separate herself further in the standings. She was trying to preserve her system for what was coming. Okafor's shooting with the high-end Schmidt and Bender scope put together a morning stage that was objectively beautiful, tight groups, fast transitions, the kind of performance that comes from a man who is in complete command of his equipment and his nerves. He moved to second overall just behind Emily, bumping Hendricks to third. Mitchell was fourth. She heard about it during the stage break. Not from anyone directly, but from the quality of the conversations happening around her, the way the standings were being discussed in the careful, neutral language of men who were recalibrating their predictions. Mitchell was in fourth place in a competition he had arrived at expecting to win. He was in fourth place behind a woman with iron sights, a veteran who was the only one on the range who seemed genuinely unbothered by anything, and a Delta operator who was quietly dismantling expectations. That was not a position Mitchell had prepared himself for psychologically, and psychological preparation, Emily had learned, was the variable that destroyed more elite shooters than any technical deficiency. She was thinking about this when Cruz appeared beside her. Cruz, who had mocked her on day one. Cruz, who had nodded at her that morning with the reluctant acknowledgement of a man revising his position. He stood next to her at the water station and didn't say anything for a moment, which she recognized as the behavior of someone who wants to say something but hasn't committed to it yet. "You know about the ammunition thing," he said finally. She looked at him. "What do you know about it?" "I know it wasn't me," he said. His voice was lower than usual. "I want that on the record." "It's not my record to keep," she said. "I know." He looked at the water in his hand. "But I was with Pacheco that morning, during the stage break. I wasn't watching him close. I should have been." He paused. "I'm not saying he did anything. I'm saying I wasn't watching." This was, Emily understood, as close to an apology as Cruz was capable of right now. It was also potentially a useful piece of information. She noted both things. "Okay," she said. Cruz nodded. He walked away. She thought about what he'd said. Pacheco. She thought about the armory access log. She thought about the scope. She thought about the pattern of it, all of it traced back along a line that ended at the same place. The 1,000-yard stage began at 1,300 hours. The wind had come up as she'd expected, 12 to 15 miles per hour from the northwest, gusting to 18 at the target line according to the range officer's readings. For scoped shooters, this was a significant but manageable variable. For iron sights at 1,000 yards, it was the kind of variable that could turn a perfect shot into a complete miss with a half-second shift in the gust. Emily stood at the line and felt the wind against her face and did not calculate. She felt. Her body had 1,000 hours of wind reading in it. She trusted those hours more than she trusted any number on a screen. The range officer called the line hot. She heard the shooters around her fire. She heard the rhythm of it, the deliberate, measured pace of men who had trained for exactly this, whose equipment was designed for exactly this. She heard Okafor fire twice in quick succession and heard the steel respond both times. She settled into her prone position. The world contracted to the aperture, the front sight, and the 1,000-yard target, a steel silhouette that at this distance through iron sights peered as a shape that required significant trust to engage. Trust in the sight picture. Trust in the calculation she had done with nothing but her face and her body and 18 years of training, she breathed. The wind pressed against her left cheek, steadier than it had been a moment ago, still somewhere in the 13-mile-per-hour range with the gust cycle at approximately 8 seconds. She found the moment in the gust cycle where the wind was at its steadiest, not absent, just stable, and she pressed the trigger in that moment. The rifle fired, 2 seconds of silence that felt like 10. The steel rang. Hit. She heard someone on her right say she hit it in a tone that had no mockery in it. None of the performance quality that characterized most of what was said about her on this range. Just the raw, unguarded sound of a person witnessing something they hadn't expected to witness. She fired again. Hit. Again. Hit. By the 5th round of the 1,000-yard stage, something had happened to the range that she could feel without seeing, a quality of collective attention that was different from anything she'd experienced in the previous 2 days. The focused professional watchfulness of 12 elite shooters and a range staff who understood what they were seeing. She stood up and stepped back. Commander Daniel Reeves was in the observation tower. She knew he was there. She'd seen him arrive before the stage began, which was itself notable because he hadn't been present for the morning stages. He had a spotting scope and he was using it. She couldn't see his expression from the line, but she could see the stillness of him, the particular stillness of someone who is watching something closely. The stage concluded. The scores were tallied. Emily had gone 5 for 5 at 1,000 yards with iron sights in a 15-mile-per-hour crosswind. No one on the range had ever seen that before. She knew this not because anyone told her, but because of how people were moving slightly differently than before, with that particular physical adjustment that people make when they are in the presence of something that has changed their reference points. Mitchell walked past the scoring table and she watched him look at her number. She watched his jaw tighten. She watched him look away, look back, look away again. Not at her score. There was a difference and she noticed it. He could look away from her. He couldn't look away from what the score said. He walked to the far end of the range and stood alone for a moment, just stood there. His equipment manager said something to him and he shook his head without turning around. She had seen men do this before, the specific isolation of someone who is processing a reality that has outpaced their preparation for it. She felt no satisfaction in it. She felt something more complicated than that, a recognition that what was happening to Mitchell right now was painful in the specific way that ego confrontation is always painful, and that pain, however much he had invited it with his behavior, was real. She didn't want him to be humiliated. She wanted him to be accurate. Those were different things. Hendricks appeared beside her. He looked at the scoring board. He looked at her. "You know what you just did," he said. "I qualified," she said. "You did significantly more than that," he said. "There are people here who have been shooting at this level for 15 years, who have never gone 5 for 5 at 1,000 yards with a scope in this wind." He paused. "You did it with iron sights." She looked at the scoring board. Her name was at the top. Below it, Okafor, then Hendricks, then Mitchell. "It still has to stand through the final phase," she said. "Yes," Hendricks said, "but right now, tonight, it stands." She nodded. That was when the duty corporal appeared at her elbow, Wallace, the same man who had printed her replacement schedule. "Staff Sergeant Carter," he said, "Commander Reeves would like to see you in his office at 1600. She looked at Wallace. His expression was professional and neutral, but there was something underneath it, not alarm, but significance. The kind of face a person makes when they are delivering a message that they know matters more than it sounds. "Understood," she said. Wallace nodded and left. Hendricks said nothing. He just watched Wallace go, and then he looked at Emily with an expression she couldn't entirely read: concern, and something else, something that looked like the particular alertness of someone who has been waiting for a specific thing to happen and has just seen the first sign that it might be arriving. She had 4 hours until 1600. She went back to her bunk. She sat with her father's rifle. She held it the way she always held it, both hands balanced across her knees, the weight of it familiar and grounding. She thought about what Reeves could want. She ran the possibilities. An update on the investigation Hendricks had triggered, a formal report requirement, something about Mitchell or Pacheco, something about the armory access log, or something she hadn't anticipated. She had learned from her father that the thing you don't anticipate is always the thing that actually happens. You plan for everything you can plan for, he told her, and then you stay loose, because the real thing is usually something you couldn't have planned for. She stayed loose. At 1550, she changed into a fresh uniform, checked her beret, and walked toward the administrative building. On the way, she passed Mitchell coming from the opposite direction. They were alone in that corridor for the first time since the competition began. No audience, no performance space, just two people in a hallway. He stopped walking. She slowed, then stopped. For a moment, neither of them said anything. She could see something working in his face, something that had been working in him since her name went to the top of the board, and she waited to see what it would produce. "Carter," he said finally. "Mitchell," she said. Another pause. She could hear him deciding. She watched him make the decision, watched it move through him. "The scope wasn't my idea," he said. His voice was flat, stripped of the performance quality it usually carried. "The damage, I signed the inspection form, but I didn't inspect it." She held his gaze. "Who inspected it?" "A beat." "Pacheco," he said. She absorbed that. She thought about the shape of what he was telling her, or not quite telling her. He was drawing a line between himself and Pacheco, between what he'd authorized and what he claimed he hadn't known about. She didn't know if she believed him. She didn't entirely not believe him either. "You're telling me this now," she said. "Not before." "I didn't know before," he said. "Not until last night." She looked at him for a long moment. Long enough to be uncomfortable. Long enough for the discomfort to be informative. "Is there anything else I should know?" she said. He looked away for just a second, just a fraction of one, and then back. "The ammunition," he said. "That wasn't me either, but I think I know who." "Tell Reeves," she said. "Not me. Tell Reeves." He nodded, once, short. He walked past her. She stood in the corridor for a moment after he was gone. She had not expected that. She had expected continued arrogance, continued hostility, the particular stubbornness of a man who has too much invested in his position to revise it. She had not expected the crack. She filed it. She filed all of it. She would need it later. She kept walking toward Commander Reeves's office, and she did not know, could not have known that what Reeves was about to tell her had nothing to do with Mitchell or Pacheco or the sabotage or the investigation. It had to do with her father, and it was going to change everything. Commander Daniel Reeves was a man who had spent 26 years in the Navy, learning how to deliver difficult information without flinching. And the moment Emily stepped into his office at exactly 1600 hours, she could see that he was preparing to use that skill. He was standing behind his desk, not sitting, which told her something. Men who sit behind their desks when they call you in are managing a situation. Men who stand are about to say something that they feel requires them to be on their feet. "Staff Sergeant Carter," he said, "close the door." She closed it. She stood at a comfortable parade rest in front of his desk, and she waited. She had learned from her father that the person who speaks first in a charged silence usually loses something, and she had no intention of losing anything tonight. Reeves looked at her for a moment. His face was the face of a man who has been turning something over for longer than this conversation. "How much do you know about your father's second tour?" he said. The question landed differently than she expected. She had been prepared for something about Mitchell, about Pacheco, about the investigation. Not this. "Enough," she said carefully. "He served in Vietnam. Second tour ended in 72. He came home." She paused. "He didn't talk about it much." "He was recommended for a Silver Star," Reeves said. "I know," she said. "It was never processed. The paperwork got lost somewhere in the system. My mother tried to follow up twice. Both times she was told the records were incomplete." Reeves looked at her steadily. "The records weren't incomplete," he said. "They were buried." The room changed when he said that. Not physically, nothing moved, nothing shifted, but the air in it became different, heavier, the way air becomes before something significant happens. "Buried," Emily repeated. "Intentionally," Reeves said. He sat down then, and he gestured for her to sit too, and the gesture itself was significant. It was the gesture of a man who is about to tell a long story and wants both of them to be settled for it. "What I'm going to tell you is not classified, not anymore, but it's not widely known and it's not simple." She sat. In February of 1972, Reeves said, "Your father's unit was part of a withdrawal operation in Hue City. It was not a clean operation. The intelligence they'd been given was wrong, not accidentally wrong. There was a faction within the advisory structure that had reasons to want that withdrawal to fail. Political reasons, the kind that don't survive scrutiny." He paused. She waited. "Your father figured out the intelligence was wrong approximately 2 hours before the operation began. He didn't have time to go up the chain. So he corrected the withdrawal route himself on his own authority, and he got 31 men out of a position that should have killed most of them." Reeves leaned forward slightly. 3 of those men went on to have careers that shaped significant parts of American military policy for the next 2 decades. One of them is currently on the Joint Chiefs. Emily was very still. "The Silver Star recommendation was filed by your father's commanding officer within a week," Reeves continued. "It was blocked by someone in the advisory structure who didn't want the operation examined, because examining why your father had to correct the intelligence would have opened questions that certain people didn't want opened. So the recommendation was buried. The witnesses were scattered. The records were marked incomplete." He stopped. "And Staff Sergeant William Carter came home to Montana without the recognition he had earned." Silence. Emily's hands were in her lap. She could feel them not shaking but aware of themselves in a way that hands become when the body is processing something too large for normal channels. "Why are you telling me this now?" she said. Her voice was steady. She was proud of how steady it was. "Because the witness problem has been resolved," Reeves said. "One of the 31 men your father brought out of Hue City submitted a formal affidavit 8 months ago. He's been trying to resolve this for years. His affidavit was enough to reopen the review." He met her eyes. "The Silver Star recommendation has been reinstated. It will be formally processed within 60 days. Emily looked at her hands. She looked at them for a long time. Her father had been dead for 4 years. He had died in the spring in the mountains he loved, with his boots on, and his rifle in the cabinet, and the quiet around him that he had needed since Vietnam. He had died without the recognition. He had lived his entire adult life, the years of teaching her, the years of hunting, the years of sitting at the kitchen table with his coffee and his patience without the recognition. And now, 4 years too late, it was coming. She felt something move through her that she couldn't name precisely. It was too complex for a single word: grief and pride and anger, and a particular species of sorrow that belongs specifically to the experience of justice arriving after the person it belongs to is gone. He would have said, "It didn't matter," she said quietly. "I know," Reeves said. "Men like your father always say that." "He meant it," she said. "I believe he did," Reeves said. "That doesn't mean it wasn't wrong." She looked up at him then. She held his gaze, and in that gaze she could see that he meant what he'd said, that this was not administrative courtesy, not a box being checked. That Reeves himself felt the weight of what the system had done to her father and was trying in the way that institutions try to account for it. "Is there something you need from me?" she said. "For the processing." "Your signature on one document," he said, as next of kin. He slid a single sheet across the desk. "But that's not the primary reason I called you in today." She looked at him. "What's the primary reason?" Reeves clasped his hands on the desk. "Because I've been watching you shoot for 3 days," he said. "And I've been reading your father's file for 8 months since the review was reopened. And I needed you to know that what you are doing out there on that range is not separate from who your father was. It's a direct line." She felt something give way in her chest, then just slightly, just enough. Not collapse, release, the specific release of a pressure that has been present so long you stop noticing it. She thought about every moment she'd spent on that range being doubted. The mocking, the broken scope, the missing ammunition, the 1,000 small ways the environment had communicated that she did not belong here. And underneath all of it, underneath every moment of doubt she'd carried since arriving, was a question she'd never quite been able to answer about whether what she had was real or inherited luck, or something that only worked in certain conditions. Reeves had just answered it, not with a compliment, with history. "Thank you," she said. She meant it in a way that was larger than the 2 words could carry. She signed the document. She stood. "One more thing," Reeves said. She paused. "The investigation," he said, "into the equipment tampering and the unauthorized armory access." He held her gaze. "We have the access log. We have Garza's statement. We have corroborating information that came in this afternoon." He paused in the specific way of someone deciding how much to say. "Lieutenant Mitchell came to see me at 15:30. She absorbed that. Mitchell had gone to Reeves before she told him to, or at almost exactly the same time she told him to. She wasn't sure which. "He gave a voluntary statement," Reeves said, "about what he knew, what he didn't know, and what he suspected about Petty Officer Pacheco." And she said, "And the investigation is ongoing," Reeves said carefully. "Pacheco has been restricted from the competition pending review." A pause. "Mitchell has not been restricted. His statement was cooperative, and his direct involvement appears to be limited to the scope inspection he signed off on without conducting." Another pause. "That's a separate matter I'm addressing with his chain of command." Emily thought about Mitchell in the corridor, about the flatness in his voice when he'd said the scope wasn't his idea, about the particular quality of a man telling a partial truth, not a lie, but a careful selection of what truth to offer. "Does he stay in the competition?" she said. "Yes," Reeves said, "unless the investigation produces something that changes his status." She nodded. She realized angry about that. She had thought she might be. She had thought the confirmation of what she'd suspected might generate the anger that she'd been keeping compressed since day one. But what she actually felt was something closer to clarity. Mitchell was still in the competition. The competition would settle what needed to be settled. "Is that going to be a problem for you?" Reeves said. He was watching her carefully. "No," she said. "You sure?" "Commander," she said, "I came here to shoot. That hasn't changed." Reeves looked at her for a moment longer than the conversation required. Then he nodded, and the nod had a quality in it that she recognized as respect without ceremony, the kind that military men give when they're not performing it for anyone. "Dismiss, Staff Sergeant," he said. She walked out. The corridor outside Reeves's office was empty. She stood in it for a moment alone with everything that had just happened, and she gave herself 60 seconds. Not to process it all, she wasn't going to process it all tonight, possibly not for months, but to feel it, to name it, to let it sit alongside her instead of on top of her. Her father had saved 31 men in a burning withdrawal in Hue City in 1972. He had done it on instinct and discipline, and the willingness to act on his own authority when the authority above him had failed. He had come home and never told her. He had sat at the kitchen table and cleaned his rifle and taught her to read wind, and never once mentioned that he had done something that deserved a silver star, because it hadn't been about the star. She understood that now with a completeness she hadn't had before. It had never been about recognition for him. It had been about the 31 men. It had been about doing what the moment required when the moment required it. That was what he taught her. Not the shooting, not the wind reading, not the trigger press or the breath control. This, the willingness to do what the moment requires. She had 60 seconds. She used them. Then she straightened, adjusted her beret, and walked back toward the residential building. She passed Okafor in the hallway outside the chow hall. He looked at her with the alert attention of someone who reads people well and is noticing something. "You okay?" he said. "Yes," she said. And then because it was Okafor and he had earned a slightly more honest answer, she said, "It's been a significant day." He nodded. "The 1,000-yard stage was significant," he said. "What you did out there." He paused. "I've been shooting at this level for 11 years. I've never seen that." "You were clean through 800, she said. "I know what I was," he said. "I also know what you were." He held her gaze. "Tomorrow's the night stage. I'm going to try to beat you. But I want you to know whatever happens, it's been an honor to be on this range with you." She felt the weight of that, the simple, direct dignity of it. "Same," she said. She went to her room. She sat on the bunk. She held her father's rifle. She thought about what Reeves had said, a direct line. What she was doing out there was a direct line to who her father was. She turned the rifle over in her hands and looked at the small marks he had made in pencil on the stock. She had memorized them years ago. She had always understood them as functional notations, sight corrections, range markings, small adjustments accumulated over 2 tours and years of hunting. She looked at them differently now. They were a record, not of corrections of decisions. Every mark was a moment when her father had assessed a situation and made a choice and then made a notation so that the next time the choice would be faster. A lifetime of decisions accumulated in pencil on a piece of walnut stock. She ran her thumb across them. She felt each one. At 2000 hours, there was a knock at her door. She said, "Come in," and the door opened and Mitchell was there. She had not expected him. She looked at him across the room and waited. He was in civilian clothes off duty, which told her this was not an official visit. He looked tired in a way that 3 days of competition alone could not account for. The kind of tired that comes from a long night of revising things you thought were settled. "Can I come in?" he said. She gestured to the chair across from her bunk. He sat, he looked at the rifle in her hands for a moment, then at her. "I talked to Reeves," he said. "I know," she said. "Pacheco acted on his own," he said. "I want you to know I believe that. I should have been watching him more closely. I knew he was," he paused, choosing the word, "invested in the outcome. I didn't think he'd cross that line." "But you knew he might," she said. "A beat." "I thought he was just talking," Mitchell said. "The way guys talk when they're frustrated." "He did more than talk," she said. "Yeah," Mitchell said. "He did." He looked at his hands. "I should have come to you on day 1 after the scope." "Yes," she said. "You should have." He accepted that. No argument, no redirection. He just accepted it, which was, she thought, the first genuinely unguarded thing he'd done since she'd met him. "Why did you come here?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. "Because tomorrow's the night stage," he said. "And I wanted," he stopped, started again. "I've been in 4 invitationals. I've won 2. I know what it means to walk into a competition and have everyone expect you to win." He met her eyes. "I don't think I know what it means to walk in and have everyone expect you to fail and then do what you've done. And I wanted to say that." A pause. "Before tomorrow, while it could still mean something." Emily looked at him. She looked at him the way she looked at a wind call, not looking for what she wanted to see, but for what was actually there. What was actually there in Mitchell's face was something she hadn't expected to find on this range from this man. Something honest. Something that had cost him to bring here. "We're going to compete tomorrow," she said. "You understand that?" "Yes," he said. "I'm not going to go easy," she said. He almost smiled, the closest thing to it she'd seen from him. "I know," he said. "Neither am I." She nodded. "Then we're fine," she said. He stood. He looked at the rifle one more time, at her hands on it, at the worn stock, at the history of it. "That rifle," he said. "What's the make?" "M14, she said. "Vietnam era." He nodded slowly, like something was making sense to him that hadn't made sense before. "My grandfather carried one," he said. "Korea." She looked at him. He looked at the rifle. Then he said, "Good shooting today, Carter," and walked out. She sat with him for a moment. The specific weight of hearing your name without a rank attached from someone who had been withholding it. She set the rifle in the case. She lay back on the bunk. Outside, the desert night was settling in over China Lake, and the temperature was dropping the way desert temperatures drop, fast and definitive, like a decision being made. The night stage tomorrow would be cold. Cold and dark, and the kind of demanding that didn't apologize for itself. She thought about her father one more time, about the 31 men, about the silver star that was finally 4 years too late coming home. She thought about what he would say if he could see her here in this room, on this base in first place at this competition. She knew exactly what he would say. He would say nothing. He would just look at her the way he looked at her when she made a shot that she hadn't been sure she could make, quiet, steady, with that particular expression that meant he had never doubted her, even when she had doubted herself. She closed her eyes. She let the silence settle around her like something earned. Tomorrow was the night that would end all doubt, and she was ready. She was on the range at 1800 hours, 90 minutes before the night stage began, and she was alone in a way that felt different from the other mornings. The other mornings she had arrived early to prepare. Tonight she arrived early to arrive, to be present in the space before it became the space where everything concluded. To let her body recognize the ground she was standing on before the darkness and the pressure and the history of 4 days made it into something larger than a range. She held her father's rifle at her side, not in the case, in her hand. She had carried it from her room this way, not tactical, not staged, just the honest weight of it against her palm, the worn stock familiar against her fingers. Hendricks found her there at 1820. He didn't say anything for a moment. He stood beside her and looked out at the dark range, and she could feel in him the same quality of preparation, the stillness of someone who has been doing this long enough to know that the most important thing you can do before a final stage is nothing. Just stand. Just be present. Just let your system settle into readiness without forcing it. "Reeves briefed the field about Pacheco," Hendricks said finally, formally, 20 minutes ago. "How did they take it?" she said. "Quietly," he said. "The kind of quiet that means people are recalibrating more than one thing at once." He paused. "Cruz apologized to you in front of the group, verbally, unprompted." She looked at him. "What did he say?" "He said he'd misjudged the situation from the start, and that he was sorry for his part in creating an environment that made the tampering easier." Hendricks's voice was measured, but she could hear something underneath it, a kind of respect for Cruz that hadn't been in his voice when he'd talked about him before. It took guts, in that room, in front of those men. Emily was quiet for a moment. She thought about Cruz and his reluctant morning nod, his careful half-confession at the water station, the arc of him across 4 days from the man who mocked her guitar case to the man who apologized in front of his peers. "People can change their minds," she said. "The good ones can," Hendricks said. She heard footsteps approaching. Behind them, several sets, the compressed, purposeful movement of competitors arriving. She didn't turn around. She knew from sound alone, Okafor's deliberate tread, the lighter, quick step of Holloway, and then a beat behind Mitchell. Okafor stopped beside her on the left. He didn't speak. He just sat up next to her, which by now she recognized as his form of statement. Then Mitchell stopped on her right. She looked at him. He looked at the range. "Ready," he said. Not to her specifically, to the air, to the night. "Yes," she said. He nodded. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. The 4 of them stood there in the last of the desert light, Hendricks, Emily, Okafor, Mitchell, and something settled among them that had nothing to do with competition and everything to do with a specific recognition that can only happen between people who have been tested beside each other and have seen each other clearly. The range officer's voice cut through the air at 1900 hours exactly. Attention on the range, night qualification stage is live. This is the final scored event of the invitational. Competitors to your marks. Emily picked up her case and walked to the line. The night stage format was this 5 targets appearing sequentially in darkness at distances ranging from 500 to 1,000 yards. Targets were illuminated by a single infrared strobe for a window of 3 seconds before going dark. Competitors with night vision optics could track between strobe pulses. Competitors without could only work within the 3-second window. Emily was the only competitor without night vision optics. She had known this since she read the competition format. She had prepared for it the way she prepared for everything, by going back to fundamentals, by finding in the constraint not a disadvantage, but a specific kind of clarity. Without night vision, she would not be tempted to track between pulses. She would not accumulate partial information and try to synthesize it. She would have exactly 3 seconds of target data per shot, and in those 3 seconds, she would either make the decision or she wouldn't. 3 seconds was enough. She had made faster decisions with less. The first target appeared at 500 yards. The strobe fired 1, 2, 3 seconds of pulsing light that her eyes read and her body processed and her hands translated into a sight, picture, a hold, a press. The rifle fired, steel rang, hit. She heard someone down the line say something sharp under their breath. Not words, just the involuntary vocalization of surprise, and she was already resetting, already returning to the aperture, already in the specific mental state her father had taught her to find and hold. The quiet. She was in the quiet. Second target, 700 yards. The strobe fired. She found it through the iron sights, smaller now, farther, the darkness around it pressing in, and she felt her body do what it had been trained to do. Not thought, movement. The trigger pressed at the moment her body told her to press it. Steel rang, 2 for 2. Down the line, she could hear the muffled, rhythmic firing of the other competitors working through their own sequences. Mitchell's cadence was fast and clean. Okafor's was slightly slower, but his steel rang with the same reliability. Hendricks was steady as a metronome. This was, she thought, an extraordinary group of people. Even now, even in competition, she could feel the quality of everyone on this line, the concentration, the discipline, the trained intelligence that had been built into each of them through years of work. She was not surrounded by people who didn't belong here. She was surrounded by the best, and she was in first place. Third target, 900 yards. She heard the range officer call it out. 900 yards, in darkness, with iron sights. The range fell into a specific silence that she recognized, the silence of a group of people holding their breath, because they understand that what is about to happen is either impossible or historic. The strobe fired. 900 yards in darkness through iron sights was a sight picture that most people who had never done it could not even conceptualize. The target at that distance in that light was approximately the visual size of a thumbnail at arm's length. The iron front sight was the same size. The alignment of the two, finding the target and placing the sight on it in 3 seconds and pressing the trigger before the strobe cut out, required a kind of trust in the body that went beyond technique into something that didn't have a clean technical name. Her father called it knowing. She found the target. She found the sight. She pressed. The strobe cut out. She waited. 1 second. 2. The steel rang. Hit. And then something happened on that range that had not happened in any previous stage of the competition. It started with one person. She thought it was Okafor, but she wasn't certain. And it was not applause, not a cheer, but a single word said in the dark. God. Just that. Just the word. Said the way a person says it when they have witnessed something that exceeds their prepared vocabulary. Then the range officer's voice, professionally controlled, but with something underneath it that was not professional at all. Hit confirmed. 900 yards. She was already resetting. She could feel Mitchell next to her, feel him in the way you feel a person when they have stopped competing and started witnessing. His cadence had changed, the rhythm of his shooting had slowed fractionally, not from failure, but from the specific disruption that occurs when a person in the middle of a high-performance task becomes aware that something extraordinary is happening adjacent to them. He was watching her, even in darkness. She could feel it. She did not look at him. She looked at the range. Fourth target. Before the range officer called the distance, she knew it. She knew it the way she knew things on this range that she couldn't have calculated from the layout she'd memorized, from the geometry of the position relative to the previous targets, from something that was beyond memory into instinct. 1,000 yards. Target 4, the range officer said. 1,000 yards. The silence that followed was different from every other silence on this range across 4 days of shooting. It was the silence of a collective understanding. Every person on this line, the range staff, the observers, the competitors, that what they were about to witness was either the end of the story or the moment the story became something permanent. Emily breathed. She thought about her father at the kitchen table. She thought about the mountains north of Billings at 5 in the morning, when the light was the same quality as darkness and the cold was the kind that stripped everything unnecessary away and left only what was real. She thought about 2 shots she had made in her life at 1,000 yards, and she thought about the man who had been standing beside her for both of them, his hand on her shoulder, his voice saying nothing because there was nothing to say. She thought about Hue City in 1972, about a man correcting wrong coordinates in the dark on his own authority because 31 lives depended on him being right, and there was no time to ask anyone for permission to be right. She thought about what Reeves had said, a direct line. She settled into the rifle. The strobe fired. 1 second, she found the target. 2 seconds, she found the sight. 3 seconds, she pressed. The darkness returned. No one breathed. And then from 1,000 yards away, in the desert dark of China Lake, the steel rang with a sound so clean and so definitive that it didn't need confirmation. Center hit. The range exploded not with noise, not with cheering, but with the specific release of a breath held by 20 people simultaneously, which produces a sound that is more honest than any cheer. Someone said her name. Then someone else said it. Then the range officer's voice came on, and for the first time in the invitational, he did not sound like a man performing neutrality. Hit confirmed, he said. 1,000 yards, iron sights. Mitchell stopped shooting. She noticed it immediately. The absence of his cadence, the specific quality of a man who has put his rifle down, not because he's finished, but because he has arrived somewhere that requires him to stop and acknowledge where he is. She fired her 5th and final target, 800 yards, a return shot that she put center with the clean ease of a woman who has already given everything the night required and has a little left over. And then she cleared her rifle and stepped back from the line and stood. She was shaking. Not much, not visibly probably, but she could feel it in her hands, the fine bone deep tremor of someone who has just spent every resource they have on something that mattered and is now standing on the other side of it. She breathed. She was still breathing when Hendricks reached her. He didn't say anything. He put his hand on her shoulder once firmly, briefly, and that was enough. That was more than enough. Okafor was 3 steps behind him, and his face in the low light of the range was the face of a man who has just updated his understanding of what is possible. 5 for 5, he said, at night, with iron sights. He shook his head slowly. Carter, I've been trying to think of something adequate to say since that 900-yard hit, and I've got nothing. I genuinely have nothing. You shot clean tonight, she said. I shot well tonight, he said. You shot something else. She held that. She let it be what it was. Then she heard Mitchell. He was behind her, and when she turned, he was standing with his rifle at his side, not in its case, just at his side, and he was looking at her with an expression that had none of the calculation or performance or careful management of the past 4 days. It was an open face, stripped. I owe you more than an apology, he said. I know that. You gave Reeves an honest statement, she said. That matters. It's not enough, he said. No, she agreed, but it's a start. He looked at the rifle in her hand, at her father's rifle. I want to ask you something, he said, and I want you to know I'm asking it straight. She waited. When you stepped to the line tonight, he said, for the 1,000-yard shot, what were you thinking? She considered the question. She considered whether to answer it simply or accurately. She chose accurately. I was thinking about my father, she said, about a night in Vietnam when he had to make a decision in the dark without anyone's permission and with everything on the line. She paused. I wasn't thinking about the shot. I was thinking about what the shot came from. Mitchell was quiet for a moment. That's the difference, he said. Not to her, more to himself, recognizing something. It's one of them, she said. He nodded. He looked at her one more time directly without the armor, and then he said, "Good shooting, Staff Sergeant Carter." Not Carter, Staff Sergeant Carter, the rank restored full and deliberate. She returned it the same way. "Good shooting, Lieutenant Mitchell." He walked away. Commander Reeves came down from the observation tower at 2000 hours. He walked across the range with the measured authority of a man who has been in command long enough that he doesn't need to perform it, and every person on that range tracked him without trying to. He stopped in front of Emily. He looked at her for a long moment. "I've been running this invitational for 6 years," he said. "I've seen extraordinary shooting in that time. Some of the best marksmen in the American military have stood on this range." He paused. "Tonight was the finest performance I've ever observed at this facility." She held his gaze. "Thank you, Commander." "That's not a compliment," he said. "That's a documented fact. It will be in the official record." He reached into his breast pocket and produced a small card, a scoring summary she could tell from the format, and handed it to her. She looked at it. Top of the field across all stages by a margin that the card made visible and definitive. She folded it and put it in her chest pocket. "The Silver Star processing is moving forward," Reeves said. 60 days, as I told you, and when it's formally presented, it will be presented with your family's name. Your name." He met her eyes. "His record now includes who taught you." She felt that in her chest, in her throat. She held it together with the same discipline she had used for 4 days, but it was closer to the surface than it had ever been. "He would have said it was unnecessary," she said. "I know," Reeves said. "We're doing it anyway." He extended his hand. She shook it. The handshake was firm and equal, and said everything a handshake between two people who respect each other is supposed to say. He walked away. She stood alone on the range. Around her, the competition was concluding, equipment being packed. Range officers finalizing logs, competitors moving in the purposeful, tired way of people at the end of something significant. She could hear voices, the occasional laugh, the specific social decompression of a group of high-performance people releasing 4 days of accumulated pressure. She heard her name in those voices, not mockingly, not with qualification. Just her name said the way names are said when they've become something. She opened the rifle case on the ground beside her. She laid her father's rifle in it gently with both hands, the way you place something precious in a space made for it. She ran her thumb once more across the pencil marks on the stock. 50 years of decisions, 2 tours, 31 men, a silver star that got buried in a daughter who had carried what it represented across every range and mountain in silent mourning since she was 9 years old. She closed the case. She picked it up. She walked off the range. Hendricks fell into step beside her without a word, the way he had done since the second morning, the way a good spotter moves up beside the shooter, not ahead, not behind, but parallel. Okafor joined them a moment later on her other side. The 3 of them walked in a silence that was not empty, but full of the specific substance of something accomplished, something real, something that would still be true tomorrow and the day after and every day past that. At the edge of the range, Emily stopped. She looked back, one look over her shoulder at the 1,000-yard line where the steel target still stood in the dark, invisible now but present. She could feel it the way you feel the exact location of something you've already found in the dark. She thought about what her father had said years ago when she asked him how he knew when a shot was ready. "You don't know," he said. "You trust." And trust is not the same as certainty. Trust is what you do when you've done everything you can and you still have to act. He had looked at her across the kitchen table with his steady, patient eyes. "That's not a weakness. That's the whole thing. That's what it all comes down to." She turned forward. She walked. Behind her, the range was dark and the desert was cold, and the 1,000-yard steel stood silent in the night. But somewhere in the record of that range, in Garza's logs and Reeves's report, in the memories of every competitor and range officer who had been present, the fact of what had happened was now permanent. Emily Carter, Staff Sergeant, USMC, daughter of William Carter, trained on iron sights and mountain wind and the patient, relentless discipline of a man who had saved 31 lives in the dark without asking anyone's permission, and come home and taught his daughter everything he knew. She had not won because she was better than the men around her. She had won because she was the sum of something they could not replicate, not with better glass, not with ballistic calculators, not with custom triggers or high-end optics, or any of the modern systems that the best military in the world had built to make excellence accessible. She had won because she was built on legacy. And legacy, unlike equipment, does not fail under pressure. It only gets stronger.